Welcome, fans, to an emergency episode of Rangers Ed, presented by Lucarelli Law. If you're in Florida and need a lawyer, call Lucarelli Law and tell them the boys at Rangers Ed sent you. This is your host, Cousin Ed. I'm here with Mikey Produces and Mikey 150, so let's call it the Rangers Mikeys today, since I'm the odd man out in this one.
Finally.
Yeah, I know. We got numbers advantage. It doesn't happen often.
Coach Ed and Little Ed are in Pennsylvania right now coaching in the Nationals, so they can't be here, but I'm sure we'll get their reactions soon. But, the trade deadline, 3:00 p.m. today, trades were rolling in past the deadline like every year. It comes in till 4:00 or so as the league processes all the trades. The Rangers made a few. I feel like I don't even need an outline for this episode, Mikey. I just use our group chat from the last 3 days on WhatsApp. There, it was kind of nuts, but
I think we're going to need to get a message count for the last 3 days.
So much player movement in the league, and honestly, it's good. It's good for the league. It's good for hockey to have player movement. A lot of fans like that kind of stuff. I mean, it's been successful for the NBA. With all the player movement they've had, has really drawn attention. So, I think it's good for the league. It's hard to make trades with the salary cap, but teams got creative. There's a lot of salary retention, and a lot of big names moved, and teams are filling their holes. I feel like, we just start with the Rangers, right? I mean, this is a Rangers podcast, so let's just start. A couple days ago, the Rangers picked up Alexander Wenberg from Seattle in exchange for a second-round pick in 2024 and a fourth-round pick in 2025. That fills their third-line center role. Today, they picked up Chad Ruhwedel from Pittsburgh for a 2027 fourth. Ruhwedel, a depth defenseman. He's won 2 Stanley Cups. And they also got Jack Roslovic from Columbus for a 2026 fourth-round pick that could become a third if the Rangers make the Stanley Cup Finals and Roslovic plays in 50% of the playoff games. And they also made a minor league deal sending Turner Elson to Minnesota for Nick Petan. Petan will go to Hartford. Mikey, what do you think about the Rangers' moves? I mean, and let's talk about it in the context of not getting Buchnevich, Vetrano, or Gensel. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, first of all, the big one is that the Rangers didn't overpay. I mean, the whole trade deadline as a whole, there was very little overpayment for players, which was a nice change of pace from previous years. It's hard to dislike anything the Rangers did. I mean, they needed a third-line center. They went out and got the guy they wanted. I mean, Wenberg, he's a bit vanilla in terms of what he brings, but the upside to him is he does everything. He does everything well, and there isn't really any gaping holes in his game, which is really what you need out of a third-line center. There's nothing that, there's really no drawbacks to getting him. He's a solid player, and what you want in the playoffs is consistency, and I think he brings that to the Rangers lineup. So that's a great pick. And then, I mean, I tweeted it out today on the brand new Rangers Ed Twitter account at Rangers Ed 150. No big deal.
150. Rangers Ed 150 Twitter.
Rangers Ed 150. Yeah.
I like
but
that.
Adding a depth defenseman, all these yahoos on every YouTube video talking about any trade, that's all, you need to add depth defenseman. Every team wants to do that at the deadline. It's always a great move. There's never a bad thing to have a depth defenseman, especially one that can bang in the corners, that'll get dirty, play hard in front of the net. And I mean, that's what the Rangers got. So I like it. Great move.
Yeah, I think with Wenberg, a lot of fans, like you said, he's vanilla. I've been, watching the internet and seeing what fans are saying, and they're this guy's got 9 goals. Guys, I don't know how many times I have to say it. Teams that go after the big names at the deadline rarely win the Stanley Cup. It doesn't happen. And the reason is that the Stanley Cup roster is really built in the offseason. It's built through the draft. It's built through trades and free agent signings. The deadline is for supplementing your team, right? So the Rangers, with Hedel's injury, they needed a center. They pick up a 6'2" center who can skate, who's a good passer. He's a defensively responsible guy, and at this point in his career, a veteran, right? I remember when he was a rookie, but he's a veteran now. So it's a good move, right? I mean, it's just a solid player to fill that role. We had Johnny Brodzinski on that line nothing against him. I know he's one of Little Ed's favorites, but Wenberg is a huge, huge upgrade, and it looks like Laviolette's going to put him on the penalty kill right away. So that's the kind of player you're adding. It's a supplemental piece, right?
And to be clear, a third line center must, above all else, be responsible in their defensive zone. If you put a guy on the ice on your third line and they're not responsible in the defensive zone, you just can't have him play. Wenberg fills that role. And if you're chirping a guy for having 9 goals playing on the third line, like, what more are you looking for from a third liner? You want a 30-goal scorer on your third line? Like, yeah, sure, it'd be nice to have a 20-goal scorer in that center position, but that's a luxury, not something that every team has. Wenberg's a great player for that role. I mean,
yeah,
doesn't make sense to me when people like. No, go ahead.
What I was going to say is the fans look at raw point totals too often. I'm guilty of it sometimes. I know Coach Ed makes fun of me for it, but I don't. Point totals have a place, but when we're supplementing a team, you need to identify a skill set that your team is missing or needs. And Wenberg fills that. I mean, look, Will Cooley, he bangs in the corners, he crashes the net. Capo Caco is a possession monster. He gets the puck in the corner. Yeah, he doesn't do anything when he has possession, but he gets possession, right? Now you add a playmaking center to those guys who's a big body. Sure, he's vanilla, but he's a big body, right? He's not easy to knock the puck off. To that mix, and you're hoping that can spark a little more offense out of that line, and also keep them defensively responsible. And let's also remember, it takes Mika Zibanejad away from the other team's top lines if Wenberg can come in and play a defensive shutdown role with Kako, who's an elite defensive forward, and Cooley, who's been solid defensively as well. So if those three can play that role, maybe that ignites Mika Zibanejad more than getting a Jake Gensel. And let's talk about Jake Gensel. Okay, Jake Gensel traded from Pittsburgh to Carolina. We're going to talk about Carolina in a few, but the Rangers were all over this. I mean, it was rumored that Capo Caco in a first, Kako Offman in a first, Offman in a first. The Rangers are getting Gensel, Rangers and Hurricanes. And I tweeted it out. Don't do that. Don't trade Kako in a first for Jake Gensel. I think it's stupid. And, I got a little bit of pushback from people. And I see a lot of people online saying, oh, the Rangers are win now. They have a 2-year window. They got to go for it. That's the kind of move that if you make it, that's why you have a 2-year window. That's what gives you a 2-year window, is trading young guys and future assets every single season for a win now rental. You can't do it every year. They just tried it last year with Tarasenko and Kane. Okay, you're going to go in and trade Capo Caco, a guy who's going to be in the NHL for another 12 to 15 years, and a first-round pick. Granted, first-round picks aren't untouchable, but for a guy who's going to be here for 2 or 3 months, to me, that makes no sense, especially when you look at the price of rentals, Mikey. Why is that the Rangers' price for Jake Gensel? Why is that what everyone wants to give up? And that's the rumored price. I look at all these trades every year. Mark Stone, what did he get traded for? A prospect and a second-round pick. That was a rental for Vegas, and then they re-signed him. But you look at all these rentals, they don't. And what did Gensel go for? He didn't even get a first-round pick. He got a second-round pick. And what was the condition on that pick? I think it was like, if Carolina reaches the finals, it becomes a first-round pick. So it's a second-round pick unless Carolina reaches the Stanley Cup Finals, then Pittsburgh gets a first-round pick, right? But we're going to give up Kako, Offman, and a first-round pick for Gensel. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
To a division rival, too. To a division rival, which makes it even more ridiculous.
Exactly. So, I mean, I'm glad Drury didn't pull the trigger on that. I mean, do you agree, or are you on the other side of that coin?
I mean, I completely agree, and that's just the result of a media circus. I mean, go back to what you said. This idea of teams being in win now mode is so ridiculous to me. Like, the entirety of the Rangers core, minus Mika, who's 32 or 30, and Panarin's 32, is under 28 years old. Like, in what world does that qualify as being in win now mode? You have a Norris caliber defenseman, 25 years old. You have top 5 goalie in the NHL, 28 years old. I mean, like, get out of here. You guys are a bunch of yahoos in the media. I mean, that's what drives stuff like that. And I mean, we texted about this plenty. It's just ridiculous. I mean, there's these people, these armchair GMs that just think they know everything, and then they read someone else's tweet, and it's like it makes sense to them, so that's it. Like get over
I think
yourself.
win now. So I think win now is one of those terms that got like adopted and repurposed, by the
Yeah,
media. So are the Rangers a win now team? They definitely are a win now team. They're in first place. They're going to
yeah,
win now. They want to win this season. So
yeah,
that it technically makes them a win now team. But when the way that the media uses it, sometimes it's almost like win now means win at all costs. Like just
yeah,
trade all the future pieces. Who cares?
yeah,
Get everybody, and just bulk up and go for it. This one season will be it. And it's like, that's
yeah,
fool's gold. That's
yeah.
fool's gold. There's 16 teams trying to win the Stanley Cup every year that make the
Hmm.
playoffs. And a
Yeah,
lot of luck goes into that. A lot of
hundred
luck. I mean,
percent.
you go trade the whole farm. You get Jake Gensel in game 1 of the playoffs. Adam Fox breaks his leg, God forbid. You just wasted that. You wasted all those assets, and you can't keep
Yeah,
Jake
Gotta
Gensel.
use
You know what I
someone
mean?
else.
So no,
yeah.
whatever. I'm just making a point. Obviously, I knocked wood. I knocked wood when I said it, but I'm making a point. Like,
Couldn't
there's a
have
lot
said
of luck
Austin
that goes
Matthews, huh? You just couldn't have said Austin Matthews.
So you go and you supplement your team and you fill holes and you get Wenberg for third line center and you go and you get a Jack Roslovic 50% off on his contract, so you get him at $2 million. He's a UFA at the end of the year. Not gaudy numbers. He's put up 40 points twice each of the last 2 seasons. This year he's down a little bit, but he does have 13 points in his last 12 games. 27-year-old right-handed forward, fast, good passer. He's got some innate skills, a little weak in his own end. A guy who could play off the rush. What have we been saying on the show for weeks? Mika and Kreider need a forward who can play off the rush. So I think this reminds me of getting Vetrano. This is the same kind of move. Granted, Vetrano's a little bit different of a player. I'm not comparing them, but it's the same kind of move. A guy under the radar, trading a 4th-round pick, saving him from another team. Well, I guess Vetrano was not saved, but acquiring him a little bit under the radar, and he comes in and he's going to get a chance probably to play with Zibanejad and Kreider. And maybe you catch fire there. And worst case scenario, you have another option where you can mix and match the lines. He's an NHL quality forward. That's a good move. Yes, it's not Jake Gensel. It's not Jake Gensel, but we still have our 1st-round pick. We still have Brennan Othman. We still have Gabe Perreault, and we still have Kaapo Kakko going into the playoffs and future seasons. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on getting Roslovic? Have you had a chance to see him a lot? I mean, I remember, this year, not really. I haven't seen him, but I know his game from watching him over the years.
Well, I haven't seen him play too much, but the one thing I will say is, I mean, 40 points a season is, it's pretty good, not bad. But 40 points a season with the current Columbus Blue Jackets, that's pretty good. I'll take that. I mean, there's very little offensive help on that team. I mean, Johnny Gaudreau takes 3-4 game siestas from touching the puck, and the only real offensive threat they got on there with any sort of experience is Boone Jenner, and like that's just not a great club. So any sort of offensive success you have with that team should be kind of treated as such. So with that in mind, it's a great pickup. I mean, you need guys that can forecheck, which I know for a fact that he does. And again, I mean, you just need guys that go into the corners in the playoffs. Playoff hockey is a completely different animal. And all these armchair GMs that judge people based on their point totals, like there are a great many players that are average regular season players, but are phenomenal playoff players. I mean, it's just a fact. And, guys like Josh Anderson has always been one of them, sort of an average regular season guy, just hammers people in the playoffs. I remember
Alex Killorn reminds me of that.
Alex Killorn. Yep. David Krejci and Nathan Horton on the Bruins. Like Horton was an average forward, and then come playoff time, like first ballot Hall of Fame, like unbelievable player in the playoffs. So there are guys that do that. I mean, granted, Roslovic's young, limited to no playoff experience, but he has potential to be a guy that can do that. You don't really know coming from Columbus.
I just like his speed. He's 6'1", 200. He's a big boy.
Yep.
He's not tiny. I like his
Yeah.
speed and his playmaking ability, and it's someone that I'm okay putting with Zibanejad and Kreider because, frankly, this whole narrative of like we need to get Zibanejad and Kreider going 5-on-5 is absurd to me. I find it completely absurd. I mean, you need to put somebody there who can complement them, but it's absurd because Zibanejad and Kreider are two stars in this league. They are two of the Rangers' best players, right? I mean, this team is only going to go as far as Zibanejad, Kreider, Panarin, Fox, and Shesterkin take them. That's
Yeah.
the reality. Everybody else on the team is a complementary piece. Even Laffy, complementary piece. Those 5 guys need to show up for the Rangers to succeed at different times,
Yeah.
right? When it matters. It doesn't have to be always Panarin, all 5 of them at all times, but they're the ones that need to show up. So listen, if Mika Zibanejad doesn't find his game, it doesn't matter what right wing you put with Zibanejad and Kreider. The Rangers are going to have an early playoff exit, right? So like,
Yeah.
what are you doing? You're going to go pay for a Jake Gensel to get Zibanejad going? You're paying the guy $8.5 million for 8 years. He
Yeah.
better be getting himself going. It's the wrong
Yeah.
mindset. So I think Drury's giving this core one more chance. This is a playoff stretch here. We got these 5 guys. Go perform. And here's
Yeah.
some more pieces for the team to, be competitive, but go perform. And if not, I don't know. I think there's going to be some changes to the core in the offseason because this will be the 3rd playoffs, in a row with the same core players. But
Yeah. But I mean, you led this segment saying teams that make blockbusters don't win. I mean, let's follow that up and say, what are the
it
teams that
rarely
do
happens.
win do? I mean, look at Tampa. You've brought it up how many times? They don't go after the big fish. They add the piece, the right piece, not Gensel, not Jack Eichel, not whoever's the carrot on a stick.
Yep.
It's just about adding the right piece. And guys like Roslovic that don't have the playoff experience but have tremendous upside for a very low price. I mean, it's great. That's just a good GM, is what that says
Yeah,
to
I
me.
mean, the last 4 cup winners, Vegas last year, Ivan Barbashev, Colorado the year before, Arturi Lehkonen, Tampa added Barclay Goodrow and Blake Coleman, right? I mean, that's the kind of moves that teams need to make to solidify their team. And you're not, yes, those teams have better players, McKinnon, Makar, Stamkos, Point, Hedman, Vasilevsky. I get it. But the Rangers have Panarin, Fox, Shesterkin, Zibanejad. I mean, those guys need to step up, right?
Definitely. And that's another good point. Like when you bring in a big fish, like a guy like Gensel or Eichel or whoever, they tended to be leaders on the club that they come from. So when you bring them to a new place, you have a different, group of leaders, their own style. And if you come in, that's sort of a clash of heads. I mean, that's just something that's tough to get used to. It's a new dynamic. It's bringing in a strong body, like, strong influence over the room, how the team plays in big situations. That's a lot for a team to get used to in a very short period of time. So,
yeah. So before we give Chris Drury a grade on this deadline and move on, I just want to make one more point here. And I'm curious what your thoughts are. So, a lot of fans out there saying, talking about Gensel mainly because disappointment when Gensel got traded was I couldn't even like go on Twitter. The fans were just out of control, dude, online.
yeah.
So, I tweeted this out. This isn't the reason the Rangers could not outbid Carolina is because every year they trade B-level assets every year. And I'm not saying they should never trade B-level assets. I'm just saying when you do it all the time, 2 picks needed to unload Patrick Nemeth's contract, picks here, picks here, picks here. The Rangers have no 2nd or 3rd round picks for 3 years, except in 2026. They have a 3rd rounder, which they might have given up if they make the finals this year and Roslovic plays 50% of the games. They'll have lost that too, right? B-level prospects, they don't have that many. They have A-level prospects and then like C+, C-level prospects. So when that happens, you can't really outbid other teams that have those pieces unless you give up your A-level assets, right? So if Carolina comes in and says, here's 4 B-level assets to Pittsburgh, take these B-level assets, The only way the Rangers can match or outbid that is by giving up A-level assets. So
or roster
that would,
players,
or
and neither
roster
one of
players.
those is. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's also a you know, I don't want to say a symptom, but it's like a side effect of making these trades to unload bad contracts, etc. You don't have the assets to go out and outbid a competitor for a certain player, and that's what happened with Carolina. I mean, what Carolina gave up is 4 or 5 B level assets. They did not give up an A level asset for Gensel, but the Rangers don't have any. Right? They just don't.
Yep.
They don't have any.
Well, this is. I mean, do you want to just segue into talking about the Bruins right now? Because I mean, what you just said mirrored the entire Bruins trade deadline. Exact
No.
same
So
situation. Traded away
before
B-level assets. Yeah, it's the same
before we do the
situation as the
Bruins,
Rangers. Yeah.
before we do the Bruins, Chris Drury grade. I'll let you go first. I mean, grade his deadline like a A to F.
I mean, I can't really give him anything but an A. I know there's nothing wrong with what he did. He made the right moves, filled the right holes, and for what was available and what they would have costed, or what they would have cost, excuse me, I can't see him making moves and getting better return. So I'm giving him an A. Sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna give him an A minus, only because the sting of not getting Gensel to me, drops him a point. But and the reason that they couldn't get Gensel partly is his fault, right? The Nemeth signing that led to them having to unload 2 second-round picks.
Mm-hmm.
Certain moves that they couldn't make were partly because of mistakes that he made in his first year as GM. Now it's like his fourth year. So he's much better. He's improved, but I'll give him an A minus. I think it was a good deadline. I think the Rangers got what they needed, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the team gels. I'm
Mm-hmm.
excited, honestly.
Yeah.
The Rangers are really being underrated league wide. I think the national media is not really paying attention to them as a cup contender, and they've been in first place for
Yeah.
majority of the year.
Yeah. I agree. I don't think it's so much that they're underrated. I just think that there are teams with way more buzz about them. I think if you ask anyone about the Rangers, they'll say, watch out. That's a good team. But I just don't think this team has generated the buzz that other teams have through the course of this year. Teams like Toronto that are constantly a media circus. Rangers have kind of uncharacteristically flown under the radar this year.
And do you think that's because there's no belief that this core can get it done when it actually is needed because of the first round exit last year? Zibanejad struggling 5-on-5. Do you think maybe people are looking at the Rangers as kind of a paper tiger?
Maybe. I think it also has something to do with how Panarin played early on in the year. I think the Rangers were so attractive to people that might not necessarily watch a Rangers game because Panarin was the best player in the NHL for the better part of like 2.5 months. Like he was electric at the start of the season. And like I would actively seek out Rangers games to watch. And like I think he kind of tapered off a bit. Like that's kind of an uncharacteristic, unsustainable level of play for most people. So I think when he kind of tapered off, you sort of had teams like Edmonton coming out of that start that they had and getting a 16 game win streak. And I think there's just been a lot of buzz around certain teams at critical times. And I think Panarin playing so well at the beginning of the year generated so much hype that when he stopped, people just started paying attention to other interesting stories like Oilers winning and such. But
Yeah, I think that's fair. All right, so let's talk about Boston. Boston made 2 moves. They got Pat Maroon and Andrew Peak. They gave up Jacob Zaboral, Luke Toporowski at 2027. So that kid who in 2027 is going to be how old? How old is he now?
it's like,
He's
I don't even know.
14.
50, yeah,
14-year-old
14, 15. Yeah, something
some
like that.
some mediocre 14-year-old and
Yeah.
2026 sixth rounder. Bringing in Peak and Maroon. Boston, not really a lot of space or assets to do much more. I mean, Mikey, what are your thoughts on Pat Maroon and Andrew Peak coming into Boston?
Well, I mean, before we get there, you said it with your diagnosis of the Rangers and Drury there. It's the exact same situation in Boston. 0 B level assets. We have a few significantly less than the Rangers, but we have some good A-level prospects, and then guys that you don't mind leaving behind at the rink. So I think they did great. There was a deal in place with LA reportedly for Allmark. I mean, I would have loved to have traded Allmark, get a third line center, but there's merit to sticking with your team. I mean, look at Carolina. They have barely added anyone the last 2 years, and they made it to the conference finals while everyone else has gone and sold their whole farm. Pat Maroon's a great fourth line grinder, and Andrew Peak just eats pucks. I mean, he has the sixth most blocked shots, I think, in the last calendar year, maybe like 160 some odd shots. It's the same thing, we said earlier. Got grindy defenseman, depth defenseman. Everyone wants those at the deadline. Andrew Peak brings that. He's big. Fell out of favor in Columbus after he tore his labrum and sort of didn't really get back to form. So he's got a little work to do on his game. But I mean, all the assets are there: the shot, the speed, the physicality. So I love it. No complaints.
Yeah, anytime you can get Pat Maroon at the deadline, you got a good chance to win the Stanley Cup, right? I think that's
Oh yeah. And can we just
that's the
say,
reality.
but like for the sake of the NHL, you touched on, it's nice to have all the buzz about the NHL. Can we please mic up Marchand and Maroon in the same game
Oh,
and just
geez.
get that on the internet somewhere? No
They're
one is
gonna
safe. Nothing is sacred. I mean, just
they
give
are
that
gonna
to the
be
people. The people deserve it.
they are gonna be tough to play against with between Marchand, Frederick, and Maroon. I mean, that's a lot to deal with in a 7-game
Yeah.
series.
Yeah.
So
But
I like the moves. I think Peak is an upgrade. I think Boston could probably use a top line center. But if there's not one available, then there's not much you can do. So
yeah.
I think it's
Yeah.
something they'll address in the offseason.
Yeah.
So look, I mean, the Rangers likely not going to play Boston in the first round. Probably wouldn't meet them until the Eastern Conference Finals if both teams get that far. But how do you think the Rangers match up with Boston in a 7-game series?
I mean, that's not even a competition. The Rangers win 10 times out of 10. It's so to be clear, the Bruins, what you said, need a first line
Oh,
center. The Bruins can't win faceoffs. This skid that they've been on in the back half of the season is largely due to their inability to win faceoffs. They had the easiest schedule through the first 2/3 of the year till the All-Star break, and post All-Star break have the hardest schedule. When you play the best teams that have the best centers in the league, and you can't win faceoffs in your defensive zone on the penalty kill, you're just not going to win games. And Boston, I mean, I'd be very surprised if they make it out of the first round. Very, very surprised. So
even if they play Toronto?
yeah, yeah. To be perfectly honest, yeah. I mean, they're
Okay.
going to be a pain in the ass, but how long can you keep Austin Matthews from putting the puck in the net?
So I think with Boston, it's interesting. I mean, they got great goaltending. Obviously, Allmark won the Vezina last year. A little struggling a little bit, but Swayman is a stud, and
He is this.
they got a pretty solid defensive scheme. And then they got 3 or 4 guys that can really drag you into the mud. So I think
Mm-hmm.
Boston is not an easy out. I mean, I appreciate you watch every game and you're a fan of the team and you're giving an honest assessment. But Boston's not a team I have on my list that I'd want to play in the playoffs. They're gonna, like I
Mm-hmm.
said, they'll drag you into the mud. Can you imagine Mikey produces Mika Zibanejad being dragged into the mud in a playoff series with Boston? I mean, that's not something I want to see. I don't think he's gonna respond well
Game
to that.
over.
Do you?
No shot.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know. I think Boston's not really a great matchup for the Rangers. It benefits them if the
Yeah.
Rangers are going to make a run that Boston is out.
Yeah, I do agree with that, but they have a hard time scoring when Pasternak's not on, and like they've recently got some depth scoring, but when guys like Frederick and DeBrusque and Morgan Geekie go cold, the Bruins will not win. I mean, they just
Yeah.
won't. It's too hard to get for one guy to carry your team in the playoffs. It's just too hard. But I mean, you said it with Swayman. A goalie can win you a Stanley Cup. Look at Tim Thomas in 2011. Like the Bruins really had no business winning that Stanley Cup. I mean, that man won it for them. So Jordan Binnington in 2019, like goalies get hot, goalies win Stanley Cups. So anything could happen.
All right, let's talk about Carolina. So Carolina brings in Jake Gensel. They only pay 75% of his salary the rest of the year. They get Evgeny Kuznetsov as well, who is waived by Washington, cleared waivers. Carolina gets him at 50% in exchange for a third-round pick. They give up Michael Bunting off their roster, as well as 4 or 5 prospects and 3 draft picks. They keep all their first-round picks and A-level prospects. However, if they reach the Stanley Cup Finals, Pittsburgh will get their first-round pick, which would be pick 31 or 32 if they actually reach the finals. So really a second-round pick, right? What are our thoughts on Carolina? I mean, I'm going to start on this one, and then I'll toss it to you. Like, Carolina has been an analytics darling for like 4 years. Every year, it's like Carolina's got the best coach in the league. Carolina plays a great game. They're a playoff tested team. They're a pain in the ass to play against. This team does not scare me. Even with Jake Gensel or Evgeny Kuznetsov, they just don't scare me as a Rangers fan. I think the Rangers they match up well with Carolina for some reason. We usually do pretty well against them. We've come back from 2-0 deficits against them, 3-1 deficit in the playoffs, and beaten them, knocked them out. However, I do understand, they've been inching their way closer to a finals appearance, and Gensel and Kuznetsov are moves that they haven't made in the past. And Gensel is a proven goal scorer in the playoffs, and I could see this team winning the Stanley Cup, but I wouldn't be scared to play them in a playoff series. I don't know how you feel, Mikey Produces or Mikey 150, about that, even with these additions.
I have a little PTSD from playing Carolina, but you're spot on with Carolina. I want to use the word enigma. Like, they're such a hard team to read. Like, because you look at their roster, if you sit there and look at their 12-man forward group, you sit there and say, geez, probably not going to beat this team. But then, like, you watch them play, and like, Stefan Noesen on their second line, like, he's soft. Like, he's just not a guy that you want on your team in the playoffs. That's your second line left wing. Like, a guy Marty Necas scoring goals recently. He's ramping up. Takes a lot of penalties. Too streaky. Like, there's a lot of, I don't know, like, superficial hype about that team that when you really actually look at their roster and watch them play, you start to see the holes in the game that aren't necessarily there when you read a stat sheet.
Yeah.
So from that lens, I think you're absolutely spot on when you say you're not really afraid to play the Hurricanes. The other thing to look out for is their goalie situation. Like, Freddie Anderson just played his first game in like 4, 5, 6 months. Pyotr Kochetkov, rookie. That's a pretty, I guess, tentative situation, heading into the playoffs. I mean, I guess Anderson's 41 now. Like, that's not really that young to be playing in the NHL. But, again, Tim Thomas won a cup at 40, so can be done. But there's a lot of moving parts with them and a lot of, like I said, superficial hype to that team. So I think you're pretty bang on with that assessment. Gensel brings them scoring, sure, but, there's holes elsewhere in their roster, and you want to win a cup, you need 4 lines. So,
yeah, I just don't. I mean, I can listen. Like, literally, my argument with somebody who disagrees with me would go something like this. They would point out like all the analytics about how they're forechecking and their systems and their playoff history and how they've inched closer and their coaching and their defense. And now they got Gensel, who's a play. I would hear it all, and I would just respond and say, I'm just not scared of them. Like, I don't know. I don't know why. Like, I don't necessarily have like a good hockey analysis reason for Carolina not scaring me. But as a fan, I would go confidently into a playoff series of Carolina. Now, I don't want to overstate it because Carolina could knock the Rangers out in the playoffs, but I just feel that way. I think the Rangers match up well with them, and I'd like to see that in the second round. Honestly, I think that is very possible that Rangers play the Hurricanes in round 2. Yeah. And we'll see. But kudos to Carolina for actually going for it and getting Jake Gensel and Kuznetsov. Now, I say that because they never do, right? So
yes, it was a nice change of pace for them.
It's different than the Rangers not getting Gensel, because that would be par for the course, right? Like, that would be normal. This is a move that Carolina never makes, so Maybe it changes the dynamics, and maybe they get over the hump. I can see them easily, proving me wrong and winning the Stanley Cup
Yeah,
if Anderson performs and
yeah,
all that.
yeah.
Um,
But yes, to
and-
be clear, we are not saying Carolina is a bad team. So
right,
let's all relax out there. Carolina is a fantastic hockey club. They are very well coached. And if they win the Stanley Cup, I don't think there's a single hockey fan out there that would be surprised.
right.
Um,
I
but
agree.
yes, I think when you go back to, being afraid of a team, you kind of alluded to it with the Bruins. Like, you don't want to go up. You see the roster, you look at that forward group. You don't want to play against Maroon, Marchand, Frederick. You don't want to play against the Grinders. You look at the Canes roster. There are none of those names on it. Svechnikov, maybe he's a big nasty player, but eh, you know, not too worried about it. So there's
No.
really none of that on their roster, which I think is why they don't really scare. They shouldn't really scare you from a playoff context. So
Yeah, it'll be a good series no matter who they play. They're a good team, but
mhm,
they don't scare me.
yeah,
I can again, and I could see them beating the Rangers in a 7-game series. I'm not saying that we'll easily, the Rangers are going to easily beat them. I just think,
yeah,
it's not a matchup that I'd look to avoid like I would if it were, say, the Florida Panthers, who brought in Vladimir Tarasenko and Kyle Okposo,
yeah,
giving up pretty much nothing for both those guys, two veteran players. I mean, Florida already a stacked team. They bring in Tarasenko, they bring in Okposo. I mean, what is there to say about this team? You want to talk about dragging other teams into the mud?
yeah.
I mean,
Well, there's Tarasenko does come with an asterisk, and you guys can probably relate to this. He does not play defense, and he needs to be on the ice with Alex Barkov at all times, or it's you're going to run into a situation like what happened with Tyler Bertuzzi coming to Boston last year. Very similar player to Tarasenko, plays zero defense, great in the offensive end, but he's a liability on the ice. And if he wasn't on the ice with Bergeron, burned every time. Same thing with Tarasenko. You will get burned if he isn't on the ice with a defensively responsible center. So I think they have the right center for the job in Barkov, but just great pickup, great offensive threat, but that has to be mentioned when you talk about Tarasenko.
yeah, and I think Florida at 90 points, they are the President's Trophy leaders right now. I'm not saying this because of that. I'm just saying generally with their style of play, I think it's pretty much consensus that they are the favorites to win the Stanley Cup this year. So we'll see. I mean, two
Yeah,
good additions there. Then we
yeah,
got Tampa Bay, who's battling for their playoff lives. Only 2 points up on the Islanders. Islanders have 2 games in hand. They had Anthony Duclair and Matt Dumba, as well as a few draft picks, and they give up a third and a fifth. What are your thoughts on Tampa getting Duclair and Dumba?
Well, Dumba definitely fills a bit of the Sergachev void, but I mean, really, there was nobody on the market that could do that outside of maybe Hannafin. Um, I can't believe these words are coming out of my mouth, but for the first time in my life, I think I'm rooting for Tampa Bay just because I want them selfishly to have to play Florida in the first round. I want them to be that last wild card spot and play Florida because I think that'll be one of the best series in the playoffs. Now, in terms of what those players bring to Tampa, I mean, Tampa's defense is terrible. Vasilevsky's having a bad year. I think this is another case of the Hurricanes. Like, Tampa's definitely more offensively gifted than the Hurricanes, but really the team doesn't scare me. Like, if you can shut down Kucherov, you have a pretty good chance of winning.
Yeah. I mean, Tampa's got the horses and the pedigree, so it's a little hard to say I'm not scared of them. But I'll tell you this, if the Rangers are, let's say they win their division and finish second behind Florida as the division leaders, they play the first wild card spot. I'd much rather play Detroit
Yep.
than Tampa, so
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
I mean, yeah, that's the reality. But yeah, I like the move for them. I mean, it's just two bodies that are NHL quality guys, and they're fighting to get in the playoffs. They didn't really give up much. Good moves
Yep.
for Tampa, I think, and whatever. See what happens there. It's a
Yep.
little bit different of a process for them this time around. But what about Toronto bringing in Joel Edmondson and Ilya Lyubushkin during the deadline season, giving up two thirds, a fifth, and a sixth, pretty much two defensemen. to bolster the depth there and on defense. I know you're not a Toronto fan, but what do you think of those moves?
It's so funny. Like, it's so, first of all, Toronto is an absolute media circus. Anything happens with the Leafs, like Sports Center in Canada shuts down, and that's all they talk about for 8 hours. So it's just funny because these anything they do gets blown out of proportion. Is my point. So Joel Edmondson is a great player, but he's a niche player. He's got a very select set of skills, things that he's very good at. And it mainly revolves around standing in front of the net in the defensive zone, which, that's a good thing. You need to have good net front presence in your defensive zone. But in that sense, his skill set is very limited. He does bring grit, toughness, all that stuff we've been talking about. Leafs desperately need that. Same thing with Lyubushkin. Lyubushkin's a tough guy, hits a lot, blocks shots. He's definitely a defensive player. But like the issue with Toronto has, number one, always been their goaltending. So Samsonov, that just goes without saying. Just big question mark there. But they don't know how to play team defense. It's like a team like Buffalo. They have all this offensive talent, but they can't keep the puck out of their own net because they don't know how to play defense in their own zone. So Toronto can add all these players, but realistically, it's a team thing. It's not so much a player thing. Like, yeah, they filled some holes that they were missing in their roster, but until those guys learn how to play team defense, it's just really not going to happen for them.
Interesting. Look, Toronto is a question mark for me as well. I like the moves bringing in D. D has been their issues. I question their goaltending. They'll score goals, but let's see. I mean, Boston would be a bad matchup for them, I think. I know you're saying
very
they
bad.
Win,
yeah,
but I don't think it's a good matchup for Toronto in round one. So they might be better off falling into a wild card spot, but we'll see.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a look out west. A lot going on out west, man. We're gonna do this quick because otherwise we'll be here for 2 hours. Let's start with the Vegas Golden Knights. I feel like there's no other place to start. Noah Hannafin at 25%, Anthony Mantha at 50%, Tomas Hertl, 6 more seasons of him. San Jose retained 17% of that contract for the next 6 seasons, which is wild. They get 2 third-round picks with Hertl as well. They give up David Edstrom, their first-round pick last year, their 2025 first-round pick in that deal, and they also gave up their 2026 first-round pick to Calgary to get Noah Hannafin. So they gave up 2 first-round picks plus last year's draft pick. I mean, you want to talk about going for it. Pretty much the equivalent of 3 first-round picks dealt here at the deadline. So let's talk about Vegas. How did they fit all this in under the cap, Mikey?
Well, I mean, if nobody saw the giant bat signal in the sky that says long-term injured reserve loophole, just look up in the sky. They have over $27 million on long-term injured reserve. So, I mean, it's frustrating.
Wild. Absolutely wild.
But all these moves make sense. Tomas Hertl says to me that Marchessault is gone next year. UFA at the end of the year. Hertl's on for 6.25, which is a pretty good deal for what he'll bring offensively. Hannafin. So first of all, Vegas has amazing defensive contracts. Like McNabb, Martinez, Pietrangelo is the only bad one. He's on 8.8 million, but
Theodore.
Theodore's at like 5.2, is he not? Something like that.
That's good. That's good for him.
Like, they have insanely good defensive contracts. So I think they'll be it because Martinez is a free UFA next year. So I think Hannafin will fill that. That's only adding, $2 million or so to their cap hit because he's going to be around 7 million probably. So I mean, they did amazing at the deadline. I mean, this is win now and prepare for the future levels of amazing. So it's really hard. Like, you look and you see all the first round pick, but I mean, you're giving up a first round pick to upgrade several positions. So I really don't mind that. And they're pretty substantial upgrades,
You're giving up these guys. So with Vegas, first of all, for the Everett fans out there that are complaining about the long-term injured reserve and how it's a scam and Vegas is, manipulating the cap and blah blah blah. I mean, just stop.
Yeah,
Like, yes, that is happening, but what they're doing is within the rules. So it's up to the
yeah,
NHL to decide that that's not within the rules. Otherwise, they're
yeah,
not doing anything wrong. That's the way I
yeah.
look at it. And look, I would love for the Rangers to just, wake up on Friday morning of the deadline and be like, you know what, Jacob Trouba, this little minor injury you have, long-term injured reserve, right? There's 8 million, and then go out and acquire all these guys to like bolster, and then all of a sudden Troop is healthy game one. That would be great, but they don't do that, right? So look, and the injuries are real. I mean, Mark Stone has a lacerated spleen. I mean, he was diagnosed with a lacerated spleen, right? Like, what are they supposed to do? Like, not put him on injured reserve and
Yeah.
replace him? Like,
Yeah, these
it's
aren't kids getting fake doctor's notes to miss school.
like,
Like the other
like,
side of this that nobody talks about is these are players with injuries that these GMs have taken a risk investing their money in. So yeah, sure, it affords them the capacity to perhaps circumvent the cap a bit by using the LTIR loophole, but there's also an inherent risk to signing guys like this. So it's a double-edged sword, you know.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, the hurdle news came out of nowhere. Last thing on Vegas,
Yeah.
I read on Twitter that the Vegas GM McCrimmon said that that weird condition they wrote into the Calgary trade for Hannafin, that the pick would move to 2026, was because they were waiting for whether Hurdle would actually approve the trade because he had no trade clause. So this Hurdle trade has been in the works for a few days. That means, and it just also shows how, I don't want to say this in case we ever get him on our podcast, but how like bad the NHL's insiders are. Like, nobody
How
found that
blind
out
the
for 3
media
days.
is.
Like, yeah, nobody knew that for 3 days or whatever it was. I mean,
There was
it
more
just came
talk
out of
about Barbanoff leaving San
right,
Jose than there was mention of
right.
Hurdle. Like,
Oh my god, I didn't even know he was available. All right,
yeah,
Colorado. Colorado made like 6 deals. They brought in Casey Middlestat, Yakov Trenin, Brandon Duhaime, Sean Walker, a couple prospects, and a few picks, and pretty much only lost Bowen Byram, Ryan Johansson, and Curtis McDermott. I mean, this is another team. Talk about go for it, but really smart GM Joe Sakic. To me, he's one of the best GMs in the league, and I really like Colorado's chances going into the playoffs after the moves they made.
yeah, great job all around. I mean, they needed a second line center. Middlestat, perfect. Val Nichushkin coming back from the players assistance program just got activated today. Weak bottom six, not a lot of grit. They just pulled up Chris Wagner from their AHL team there. Good bangs in the corners. That's, NHL hit leader in previous years. Add Brandon
Yeah,
Duhaime in there. That's
that's why you get Duhaime
annoying to
and
play
Trenin.
against. Yep,
Yep.
annoying to play against. Shades of the Merlot line in Boston that Sean Thornton centered. Absolute pain in the ass to play against. That's what you
By
want
the way,
on your team when you're making a run.
not to interrupt you, but I want to talk about Kako real quick in the midst of this. Casey Middlestaff for Bowen Byram. If you're going to trade Capo Kako, okay, that's the kind of trade you make when you trade Capo
Yep.
Kako, right? A young
Yep.
player for a young player. So
Yep.
that's the kind of move. So it's
Drysdale
not the
for
Kako,
Perot.
right? Well, Drysdale for Gauthier, Cutter Gauthier.
Gauthier, sorry. Yep. Yep.
So Chris Drury
Yep.
came out and he was asked about Capo Kako, and I just saw this tweet. He's a terrific young player who continues to grow and learn. He's had some really good moments playing in top positions, and we're going to keep supporting him and working with him. I think he's going to find his game and even do more. So I don't know. That sounds like he's really committed to Capo Kako. Maybe it's just what else is he going to say, that kind of thing. But it's good. Good stuff there. All right, Winnipeg. Tyler Toffoli at 50%, Sean Monahan and Colin Miller. Winnipeg gave up a slew of picks, a first, a second, 2/3, and a fourth. I mean, what are your thoughts on Winnipeg? I know you're pretty high on them. Now with these additions, what do you think?
All right. So there's a lot going on in Winnipeg behind the scenes that, gives a lot of context to this. First off, that when that team moved back to Winnipeg, sold out season tickets, yada yada, that whole generation has sort of grown out of it. Winnipeg's having a lot of trouble filling seats. So part of this push, I think, is driven by the management's perception of sort of how long this Gary Bettman is willing to let this team flounder in Winnipeg if interest keeps waning. So they signed Hellebuck and Scheifele long term at the beginning of the year. Hellebuck's the best goalie in the NHL. Convince me otherwise. They've been right on the precipice for the last few years. I mean, this year they have every player on that team that's played over 30 games has at least 10 points. Prior to Monahan coming in, most points on that team with Scheifele at 52, and they're one of the best teams in the NHL. I mean, why would you not add Sean Monahan? 8 goals in 14 games since playing. Great fit. Tyler Toffoli is a perennial, trade deadline mover. Scores on every team he gets moved to. I mean, what's not to like?
All right, Vancouver, Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov, 2 earlier trades, but we include them in our analysis here. What are your thoughts on Vancouver's chances heading in with those trades?
Tricky with Vancouver. They didn't need a center, and they got Lindholm. Really hard to hate on anyone for picking up Elias Lindholm. He's sort of a Selke type center, a Selke type center in the sense that he's got a really strong defensive game. And he sort of prioritized that before developing his offensive game, which has come. He's a fantastic offensive player as well. I mean, the Canucks are a wagon. They kind of similar scenario to the Islanders last year. They made their moves before the big bang, and then people sort of forgot about them. Watch out for the Canucks. They are an absolute wagon. Elias Pettersson he's a freak.
Yeah.
So
Thatcher Demko,
team.
Quinn Hughes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they got a top goalie, a top D, a top center.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you need to win. So they're definitely a wagon. All right, Dallas was pretty quiet. Dallas picked up Chris Tanev at 25% to fit him under the cap, and he also made some minor trades today. Nothing crazy. I mean, Dallas. I mean, are we believers in Dallas? Aren't I think they're in first place right now, aren't they? Yeah,
they are.
I think they're in first. Do you think they hold there, or where do you think Dallas ends up?
No, I think Winnipeg takes that first place in that division. No question. But Dallas that's a really tricky one. There's no talk about them prior to the deadline, really no buzz about them during it. It's another team that is sort of hard to find holes in their lineup. They play a really heavy game from first through fourth line and all 6 defensemen. When you have a team that's built like that, it's really hard to add players in the deadline that fit that style of play. Chris Tanev would be one guy that definitely does, and they went out and got him. There weren't many on the trade market I felt that really fit that dynamic, so I'm not too surprised about Dallas. And I think they're a team to watch out for in the playoffs. I mean, kind of similar to Nashville, So
yeah, Dallas I think a little more so with Jake Ottinger. I mean, he's good. He's really good. And Miro Heiskanen, I mean, they're kind of under the radar. They're a really good team. Really, really dangerous team in the playoffs. But I don't know. To me, it's in the West, it's Colorado, Vegas. It's one of those two.
That's the big asterisk in the West is Dallas is a phenomenal team, but I mean, there are teams that are phenomenaler. It's just how it is. Like it's like the East was 4 or 5 years ago.
The West is insane this year. All right, you mentioned Nashville. So Nashville, a little weird, right? They moved Jakob Trenin in a deal. They pick up a 3rd-round pick from Colorado, so they kind of helped out a rival. And then they went and traded a 5th and a 6th for Beauvillier and Zucker. So kind of in a weird spot in that they're trying to rebuild, but they're doing so well. They're in the playoffs, so get some reinforcements. I mean, pretty good work, I think, by Trotz, getting a 3rd, adding 2 NHL players, and only giving up a 5th and a 6th.
Absolutely. I mean, this is another case of the GM thinking for the future, I think. I mean, Trotz likes Beauvillier, obviously. They have a really heavy 4th line on this team. Michael McCarron, Kiefer Sherwood, and I can't remember the other one, but a very heavy 4th line. Solid lineup from top to bottom. I mean, Ryan O'Reilly's been one of the best centermen at the dot in the league for the better part of a decade. They just signed Tommy Novak, 3-year extension. When you re-sign guys like that, they get a nice little burst of juice for a while. I mean, nobody talks about Nashville, but they're definitely a team to watch out for in the playoffs. I mean, when you have UC Saros on net, I said it before, goalies can win you a Stanley Cup, and he is one goalie that can definitely win you a Stanley Cup.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
I told you my opinion on Nashville. I think they're
yeah,
a scrappy team, but they're going to go as far as UC Saros takes them. I mean, that's the way I
yep.
am feeling about them. And all right, what about the Oilers? You mentioned their win streak earlier in the year after they got Chris Knobloch from Hartford, the
Mm-hmm.
coach. Let's take a look at what they did. Adam Henrique, Sam Carrick, Troy Stetcher. They gave a first, a fourth, and a fifth. Um, where are we with Edmonton? It's a lot to give up for Adam Henrique and Troy Stetcher and Sam Carrick.
So the condition with Edmonton on them, if they're going to win, Draisaitl and McDavid can't play on the same line. I mean, Carrick and Henrique are great additions. Curious where they're going to play, likely bottom two center positions. Critique with the Oilers has always been that they stack Draisaitl, McDavid, and Hyman on the same line, and then they have 9 AHL players in the rest of their forward group. It's another case similar to the Leafs. Like they goaltending is a question mark for them. Uh, I don't know, man. I'm not really impressed, to be honest. Like they
I
did
feel
well
like
at the
everyone,
deadline, but
yeah, I feel like everyone wants Edmonton to win the cup because of McDavid. So they like really want
definitely,
McDavid to win the Stanley Cup, but
definitely.
no one really believes that Edmonton's going to win the Stanley Cup, you know?
No,
So,
definitely not. And they don't play a
I
heavy
mean,
enough game. Like they, the last two games they played Boston twice in the last couple of weeks. So I've watched Edmonton a fair bit, and Boston plays really physical against them. They always do, and you know that limits McDavid's capacity. He's still a
I
great
mean,
player. He
let me
makes
tell you
tons of great
something.
plays,
If
but
Vegas passes LA and plays Edmonton in round one,
bye
it's
bye
tough.
Edmonton.
That
Bye
is
bye
tough.
Edmonton.
That is tough. I
Yeah.
mean, I think Edmonton will beat LA. But if Edmonton drops to a wild card and catches Colorado or Vancouver or Winnipeg, or they play Vegas round one, I mean that's tough. You know, I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know. I got them fourth or fifth in the West. You know, I don't really have them as a top team out there. But all right, so let's wrap up though on a few other trades, and then we'll wrap this up. So New Jersey, we got to talk about New Jersey. They're
Mm-hmm.
out, so I didn't cover them in full, but they acquired Jake Allen at 50%. He signed through next season for a 2025 third, which becomes a second if Allen plays 40 games next year. And they also traded Vitek Vanacek to San Jose for Capo Kakinen. So they got
Mm-hmm.
Allen and Kakinen now trying to resolve their goaltending issues. I mean, New Jersey sits only 6 points out of a playoff spot, one game in hand on Tampa. They are behind Washington and the Islanders right now. But, I mean, is New Jersey a threat to sneak into that final spot if, you know, the goaltending gets fixed a little bit here?
That's an interesting question. So the Allen trade breaking before the Kakinen trade, I mean, that gave both of us a pretty good laugh. Because I mean, Jake Allen's a backup goalie, no question about it. Capo Kakinen is an interesting case. He was good in Minnesota. He had pretty limited playing time. He got sporadic periods where he played several games in a row, and there were several instances where he looked extremely good. Moving him to San Jose, it's like Roslovic coming from Columbus. You sort of got to take that with a grain of salt because San Jose is basically an AHL team at this point, plus
Yeah.
Granlund, Duclair, and one or two other guys. I don't hate it. The talk was them going after Markstrom would have cost them an arm and a leg. That team's full of young talent. I think they have a pretty high degree of faith in that roster as is. Why not give Kakinen a chance? I mean, I don't hate it for the time being. It's not the worst move. They didn't overly pay for him, so
I could easily see, I hate to say it, I can easily see, you know, Tampa or Detroit or Philly sliding, either any of those teams, and New Jersey getting
yep,
hot and taking a
yep,
playoff spot. And
yep, absolutely.
the same goes for the Islanders too. We didn't talk about them; they didn't do much, but I could
Mm-hmm.
easily see that as well. So I'm enjoying both those teams being outside the playoffs, looking in. But I do wonder, you know, if one of these goalies catches fire for New Jersey and they get a little confidence going in the playoffs, they could be a problem. So I'm kind of hoping it
Yep.
doesn't happen. But all right, closing thoughts, Mikey, on any other moves, any other teams generally. Pittsburgh. What are they doing? I don't know. Any thoughts you got before we wrap up here?
No, one note on Pittsburgh. I really enjoyed the tweets about entertaining offers on Sidney Crosby.
Oh
Those
my
were
God,
rich.
give me a break.
No real thoughts. I mean, the big winners. I think Winnipeg did great. Vancouver, don't forget about them. Watch out for Florida. Please stop talking about Edmonton and Chicago or anybody named Connor, for the love of God. But no, it was an exciting trade deadline. For the first time in a while, it was a buyer's trade deadline, which was nice to see for once after the Bruins sold their entire farm system for like 3 years straight.
Yeah, it
So,
kind of makes those earlier trades like the Vancouver made and Winnipeg made for Monahan,
mhm,
Vancouver for Lindholm, like they overpaid. And I said it at the
mhm.
time. I gave a reaction video. I sent it out for Little Ed to post on Instagram. Don't pay those prices. That is insane, right? Everyone's like, "Oh, you got to pay to get. You got to give to get." Look at today. That's it. Jason Zucker goes for a sixth. I mean, there were fans that would have traded Kako for Zucker. Anyway, I digress. I
Fans.
digress. Yeah. I
Oh,
digress. But anyway, thanks for joining me, and it's been fun chatting with you throughout this trade deadline process. I'm looking forward to some, playoff 150s, and we got to
can't
get
wait.
Little Ed and Coach Ed's reaction to these moves. I guarantee you, Coach has no idea who Roslovic is. Guarantee that. But he's definitely knows Wenberg. So looking forward to seeing that. Mikey Produces, thanks for hopping on with us. I know you had a crazy day today as well, but we want to get this content out so the fans can hear our thoughts.
You guys killed it, man. Listening to you guys is very interesting. It's like watching Sports Center, but live.
I wish you wouldn't talk so much, Mikey. For the love of
It's like
God.
Yeah.
it's like pardon the interruption usually, but Mikey and I agreed on a lot. I think honestly we
Yeah.
worked out a lot of our disagreements via text, and then we
Yeah.
came in here like meeting of the minds, kind of like.
Yeah. For those of you that don't get to read our text messages, we usually don't agree on anything.
It's
So,
like we're coming here, we agreed on like everything.
This was great. This was wonderful. Yeah.
I know you were threatening me with wagers at one point. Like I don't even.
I
And
still
here we
think
are.
Nashville's
We're like,
gonna make some moves in the playoffs. Stand by,
see.
Rangers fans.
We'll see. But all right, it's been fun, and fans, look out for next week. We'll have our analysis on Wenberg and Roslovic debuting. It looks like Ruedl's going to play, or Jones, because Trouba. They announced the Rangers. Trouba's out 2 to 3 weeks, so maybe they should have put him on LTIR and picked somebody up. But there's a lot going on here, and good luck to Coach Ed and Little Ed coaching in the Nationals. I'm hoping that they come back as winners, and if not, it's been a hell of a season. Hearing about your coaching. So if you guys are listening, good luck, go kill it, and bring home that gold or whatever the hell it is. I don't think it's the Olympics, but the trophy. Bring home the trophy.
There you go.
Y'all can watch those games on the college AAU website too.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, coach said that. So you go to what is it, aau.com or whatever, something like that.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll info out. I'm sure. I'll post something on Insta.
Yeah. Link below in the description.
There you go.
All right, everyone, go spend some time with your wives on this beautiful Friday night, guys. Thanks for joining me.
Love you guys. Tell her all about all the trades today.
Later,
She's
guys.
over it.
Later, boys.
Later, guys.